Hi, I'm Jem Stone, and I work, I'm the editor of social media for BBC Radio. And a bit like Francis, is that these two guys, is after a day with me, they quite often go, Dad, what do you do? Just what do you do? You just look at Twitter all day, don't you? Busted, right? Okay, look, actually, what I do is that is try and answer that question when people come up to me and they say, how are we doing? And I'm going to focus on that today. And when I started in my job a couple of years ago, I thought, okay, well, how on earth am I going to answer this question? And I think when it comes to the ways that listeners respond to radio, is that three things that I really needed to find the answers to. One is that a real understanding of the history of radio and how listeners have responded over that 90 years, the 90th anniversary on November the 14th. Without that, no context. Certainly platforms, the many, many different ways, from faxes 1 year in the sun to whether that might be Instagram today, all those many, many ways in which listeners have responded to radio. And certainly, as Claire was talking about this morning, and I think we're particularly bad at this in terms of social media, but certainly radio as well, best practice and understanding what are those big numbers? What are those downturns? What are those royal weddings? What are those big numbers? We know what they might be for TV. We've got a bit of an idea what they might be for radio radars. We've got no idea what they might be in terms of radio and social media. So today, a quick whiz through those three things to try and give you the answer in terms of radio and social media. How are we doing? So look, we'll start with some history and a few examples just to give you a bit of a feel for have things really changed that much? And I just... two quotes, really. This is a tweet from Ros Atkins, who does a fantastic interactive show, World Have Your Say on the World Service, but it's by Rod McKenzie, the editor of Newsbeat. And as you can see, it's that age-old, the modern versus the conservative is that radio has to modernise. And it reminded me of this quote from a really great book, one of the best books about radio, by David Hendy. And I'll give you a bit of time to have a quick whiz through the sentence. From the Daily Mail, actually, this was. And this is actually from 1967. This is 45 years ago, and we're still having those arguments in terms of radio. Look, some more examples. I just love this letter. So this is a letter. It's from a listener who's written into Family Favourites back in 1954. And they get a letter back from the producer, and the producer says, yes, the bit of music that we play as our theme tune, I think is it Chants Entonnois, it's Fugue, so that is in 1954. Wind forward 45 years is exactly the same, but this is done in a tweet. This is both at BBC Radio 4 and Evan Davis arguing about the bed underneath a trail that's played out on today, 7:50 in the morning. That took 3 weeks to arrive. That took 3 minutes to work out. Very public, very quick. Another example is that, I don't know if anyone remembers in here that remembers Radio 1 Club back in 1968. Is that Radio 1 is that you could write to Radio 1, they would send you a newsletter, they would come to your school, they would come to your hometown, they would bring artists and DJs. Is that one of the very first attempts for radio stations to try and visibly make sense of their community. Not very different really from the Radio 1 Facebook page that launched in 2007. And then three examples here of campaigns really, is that we all know this one. Maybe Jarvis is, it's already been mentioned a couple of times today. Maybe Jarvis was overstating it a little bit, I think. And maybe it was down to Absolute, as Tony said earlier on. But is that the other campaign I'm going to talk about, this is probably the best campaign slogan of a radio station campaign there's probably ever been. You should probably go and read, can you? From the Save Radio 4 Long Wave, what do we want? Long Wave. What do we say? Please. And this was a campaign in terms of listeners' response, and listeners' organisation was very, very much done in person, although it was organised quite a lot by letters after an appearance on Feedback. And then this in 1952, campaigns didn't just start a year ago with Facebook and Twitter, but this is a quote from the House of Lords, is that this was after an announcement in the personal column of the Times. So listeners were organising and responding to radio stations and taking away their radio station, but this time by letter. Okay, so in terms of today, though, lots of examples there in which listeners were engaged with radio stations. I think this pretty much sums up what radio is like in 2012, and it's a tweet from Zane Lowe. And in terms of just thinking about that, it's just, so my next 2 sections really is that, okay, given that everything is real time, how do we sort of make sense of it? Okay, now I'm really interested in the idea of peak oil. So I've been watching Dallas again. And peak oil is this idea of, are we past that moment when the amount of barrels of oil produced each day is gone? And we're in decline. And I thought, okay, well then let's start to have a think about the many ways that listeners have engaged in radio stations. Have we passed their peak? Normally you look in this place, and he's come up about 3 or 4 times today, but certainly in terms of provoking a response, again by text or letter or email, is that he is the man. And there's some evidence to back that up right at the end. Letters. Very hard to find this out at the BBC. Is that we don't really keep records anymore about the volume of letters that we receive per programme or per network. This is an example here, is from PM, from their, what is it, upshares, downshares, I think. And it's just 2 boxes. It's not the sacks of mail that were taken to pirate radio stations in the 60s, or the legendary, sacks of mail, arriving at Radio 1. I think, look, peak letter, 80s maybe, that was the moment. Email, we all know this, 55,000 emails. I won't talk about this one. I don't think we'll ever get that peak ever again, but in terms of a response to a radio show, is that clearly in 2009 that was the method. Forums, I'll explain this in a minute, but they get a really bad, I suppose, rep these days, really. Is that if you look on radio stations, it's very rare to find a forum. Mumsnet, one of the most popular, is that any football club, absolutely, forums are the place where fans discuss football. This is for the Archers message board, and just to give you a bit of a feel here is that, and that peak right up there, January 2010, Nigel fell off the roof. It's the number of posts to the Archers message board, 80 to 100,000 per month. But what you might not be able to see is that, can you see all that red? So these are the different people that have posted, okay? So it's a lot of posts, and they remain pretty stable over time. A tiny number of people that are actually making those posts. Peak forum time probably was in the mid-2000s, I think, certainly for radio stations, and certainly for radio and the BBC. And nowadays with the Archers is that the Archers fans, in terms of organising engagement with their radio stations, they pretty much do it themselves. This is a search for the Archers hashtag on Twitter on a daily basis. The number of times that people have mentioned the Archers since January 2012 is that on a day-by-day, all those peaks, yeah, that's 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So that's the omnibus, that's when all the fans get together and discuss the Archers, but not in great volumes. It's not that many, 2,500. But it's very, very high quality conversation, actually. There's a lot of people just watching it, not necessarily taking part. Okay, so we'll look at this graph, SMS. And this is often forgotten about when we talk about social media. So here's a treat. All of the texts sent to the BBC going back 10 years to all our radio stations. So that big black graph, quite clearly the majority of texts, and still even today, and I'll focus a bit on the end of the graph in a minute, is to Radio 1. A fair number to Radio 2 and Radio 5. Live, not many to the other network radio stations. And there's an interesting trend, I suppose, in the graph when you look at the last couple of years. So look, let's just take that last couple of years. So here's Radio 1, right up there where we just went above 500,000 back in spring last year. That was the Moyles, that 55 hours of radio, brilliant radio, is that it peaked that month, 512,000, I think. And there's another peak there when Radio 1 did Hackney a couple of months ago. But quite clearly, it's in decline. Quite clearly, over time, it's in decline. And I thought, okay, well, So we've done SMS, we've done letters. Let's just think about Twitter and think about tweets to Radio 1. So tweets to Radio 1 to the @BBC Radio 1 network Twitter account and it, per month, and it looks like this. And as you, we started, I mean, it could have gone back a bit further. We started measuring pretty much there. And as you can see, it mirrors the peaks and troughs of the actual, the radio station itself and the SMSs. But in terms of volumes, it's starting to take over. But here's where I suppose it's quite important, is what are we actually measuring? Are we measuring the right things? Are we measuring all of the ways that listeners are getting in touch? Is it really just the @BBC R1 account? Those are tweet replies, tweet mentions, and retweets. Let's just have a look at the daytime presenters, or the main presenters, weekday presenters for Radio 1. These are the numbers of replies, retweets, and mentions of these Twitter accounts per month, the same month in August, and it's quite a lot. Now you might say, well, they're their personal Twitter accounts. But if you have a look at, I've done it, sorry, but if you go through samples of 100 on a daily basis and look at the content of those, they are nearly, barring Fern in the middle, is that they're nearly all about Radio 1 programs, or the network. Nearly 90% really. So are they tweets to Radio 1? Now if you add all those up and think, well, okay, maybe they are presenters' tweets, network tweets, the texts, 167,000 a month. Facebook likes and comments, they're 141,000 in August. And you add all those up, you get 750,000. Really, you get one every 3 seconds. And August was a fairly quiet month. So listeners, in terms of looking in the right places, is that, by God, they're engaged with Radio 1 and they're engaged in Radio 1 in lots of different ways, but you've got to know where to look. And I don't know if Scott mentioned this morning, but my final section, he's quite right. Yes, we are. We are monitoring his likes. I don't know if you got the cake. And that's what I'm going to just talk about to close. So in terms of counting, so yes, we do. So in terms of Twitter and Facebook, is that we spend a lot of time, and we've got free tools, and Facebook and Twitter have their own tools as well. We've actually got an internal tool that looks a little bit like this, that counts for Facebook, but also for Twitter, the number of ways that, or the tweets that radio stations have received and our presenters have received, and we use that inside the BBC. Does that tell us a story about best practice? So in this section, I'm just going to give you a bit of a feel for, I suppose, the greatest hits or the things that have done well in radio this year or since we started measuring them. So here are the top 10 most followed radio network accounts. So these aren't presenters. There they are with Radio 1 right at the top. Capital Official, fantastic account, really focuses on pop. TalkSport doing really well in terms of followed. In terms of most actions, so most retweets, mentions, replies per month. So this is for all of 2012. And Choice FM's moved up a little bit. There's a little bit of movement. Partly really because if you get a lot of activity, you're going to get more followers. Actually not, I mean, it was just interesting yesterday, and this has happened quite a lot really, is that it's activity on Twitter that gets you followers, and not necessarily talking about it on the radio. And then in terms of, okay, actions per follower, then this is what the top 10 in UK radio looks like. So most engaged. And two interesting things at the top. So LBC, that's quite clearly, they tweet a lot of news headlines that go far beyond their core listenership. Choice FM is that I had a look through. These are some of their most retweeted tweets. A lot of this, lots of deaths. It's time-honoured radio techniques, and quite clearly they reach beyond a lot of their core listenership by a lot of fans of these artists want to associate themselves with those tweets and bump into Choice FM along the way. Okay, so here are some of the most retweeted tweets of all time in UK radio. Thank you, yes, you noticed. Sammy did that, very good. Okay, and some themes as well, really. So a lot of these tweets, a lot of them focus, a lot on pop fans, pretty much. Radio's done that successfully for many, many years, is that if you want listeners to engage with your radio station and you understand the pop market, then you're going to get a great response. And this is the most, so yes, this is the most retweeted tweet of all time on Kiss FM. It says, if I could be your boyfriend, I would kiss your neck. Oh, well. This is the most retweeted tweet of all time for Nick Grimshaw. Is that, in terms of these guys, is that, yes, the hits, their two most retweeted tweets when I was checking last week, although they've gone absolutely one direction mad. I don't know, anyone explain Liam's armpit hair? Want to explain? No, probably not. Is that the size of numbers there, you know, they're about 1,500, 1,000. That's still quite small. In terms of the context of the BBC, the biggest BBC News tweet, retweet of all time is about 10,000. Is that the biggest, I think, UK tweet that I noticed in August was Barack Obama's tweet about his chair, but they're still quite small numbers. This always goes down a treat, so the biggest one for Absolute Radio was this. Win money. And radio's been doing that for a very, very long time. It's now just transformed into a tweet. And there's a fair bunch of this. And this is the hardest thing to get right. So it's really hard to take the culture of presenters, the brand values of a radio station, and then try and, usually by people that aren't necessarily the presenters, aren't necessarily steeped into the values, and then try and actually turn that into a tweet. And again, Claire sort of touched on that this morning. It's really, really hard, and we don't do that very well. But when you get it right, then you get a response. So again, this is the most retweeted tweets for some of these radio networks. So a joke, the football fans, see? Everyone else, what? I don't get that. This you might, you know, you'll get it after a couple of seconds. So we are free radio, I think. Yeah, you got it yet? Got it. So there'd be most retweeted tweet. Yeah, you have. A couple of people. Yeah. This is from XFM, I think. I'm not sure. 500. Brilliant. And this is this is one of my favourites. This is it was when one of our network radio stations was it was a pop. Fans of pop artists were getting in touch with the radio station, trying to get them to play a certain record, and it was quite clearly something that the radio station would never do. And this is how they responded. And the guy who wrote that's in the audience, but I love that. It's fantastic. So, and when you can actually get the banter of a radio station, the values of a radio station, and then you actually turn it into something that feels like it's something that they would say on air, is that listeners really, really respond, and when it's conversational as well. Look, so I'm just going to wind up now. It's really, really important just to obviously have an understanding of context, just to know that Morecambe and Wise Christmas episode of 1977 had nearly 30 million viewers. We all know that in TV. We've still got a long way to go when it comes to social media. After today, I'm happy to share a lot of that data so that we can get, as an industry, a much more common language when it comes to describing this stuff. But I'm going to finish with the tweet and the Facebook message, the two most retweeted and most shared in UK radio in the last 2 years. And so this... Oh, and by the way, that's something that we do in BBC Radio, so we've got a dashboard that looks a little bit like this. And then in terms of response, we're very, very keen on focusing on the responses to our radio station rather than things like followers or fans. So we measure, in terms of retweets, replies, likes and comments, rather than fans, which could be, I don't think mean as much. So the most shared bit of Facebook content to do with radio, anyone want to have a bit of a guess what that might be, what it might be connected with? It was a photo. They nearly always are photos. It was this. And, it's, if you're a fan of the radio show, it's actually a really emotional bit of content, and it's something that you probably want to associate yourselves with, and over 100,000 people liked it on Facebook. Over 100,000. 95,000 on the Chris Moyle Show Facebook account, and another 8,000 on Radio 1. It's a great bit of content. And then in terms of tweets, now, so this is the most retweeted tweet, the next slide, of all time in UK radio, is that I show this to people and they go, ooh, and they're not quite sure. And it's something to do with someone that you've seen already, is that it might require a bit of explanation, but I'll just show it to you anyway. It was this from Capital FM. 17,000 retweets. They understand their audience, okay? That's not you, you see? They understand their audience. Do you want me to explain it? Maybe not. Shall I? It's something to do with Justin Bieber and code word that Justin Bieber has for Justin Bieber's things, right? Okay? All right. So anyway, so look. When these guys actually say, well, what do you do all day? I look at stuff like that. That's what I do, right? So look, thanks very much.
The thing that came out on top for me was Twitter. Everybody's got to really start getting engaged in Twitter. It's a big social media world out there now that seems to be overtaking everything.
I've come away really excited about radio's future, and that's one of the good things about this conference.